The telegram arrived at the Silver Peak, Nevada railway station on a Tuesday morning in August of 1882. And Tabitha Ortega didn't cry when she read that her father was dead, because she had learned long ago that tears were a luxury reserved for those who could afford weakness. She folded the paper into precise quarters, tucked it into her carpet bag alongside her French dictionary and Spanish prayer book, and stepped onto the dusty platform wearing a traveling dress the color of charcoal and an expression that could cut glass. Silver Peak shimmered in the heat like a mirage, all weathered wood and false-fronted buildings that looked like they were held together by stubbornness and spite. Tabitha spoke 3 languages fluently: English from her mother's Boston relatives, Spanish from her father's Mexican heritage, and French from 4 years at a finishing school in San Francisco, where wealthy merchants sent their daughters to learn which fork to use and how to pretend they didn't notice when men talked over them. But standing there with dust settling on her traveling cloak and the Nevada sun beating down like a judge's gavel, she realized none of those languages had taught her how to say what she felt, or if she even felt anything at all. Her father had been a silver speculator who'd made and lost 3 fortunes before finally settling in Silver Peak to pan for dreams in played-out mines. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since she'd refused his summons to leave school and keep house for him. Now he was gone, and she'd inherited a claim that was probably worthless, a cabin she'd never seen, and a town full of strangers who stared at her like she was some exotic bird that had flown in through the wrong window. The lawyer's office was above the general store, reached by an exterior staircase that creaked ominously under her boots. Samuel Preston was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the apologetic manner of someone who delivered bad news professionally. He spread papers across his desk like he was dealing cards. "Your father's claim is the Lucky Maria, about 3 miles northeast of town," he said, pointing to a crude map. "The cabin's small but sound. There are some debts, but nothing that should trouble you if you sell quickly. Most of the merchants will give you fair value for I'm not selling," Tabitha said. Preston's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "Miss Ortega, I don't think you understand the situation. This is rough country. A woman alone. I understand perfectly, Mr. Preston. My father spent his life chasing silver. Perhaps he finally found some." She switched to Spanish, just to watch his confusion. "O tal vez finalmente encontró algo que valía la pena." "I'm sorry, it doesn't matter." She stood, gathering the papers. "Where can I hire someone to take me to the property?" Preston directed her to the livery stable at the edge of town, warning her about the heat and the isolation, and a dozen other things she stopped listening to halfway through. The stable was a large barn that smelled of horses, hay, and leather, and the man working there was bent over a mare's hoof, his back to her. "Excuse me," she said. "I need someone to take me to the Lucky Maria claim." He set down the hoof gently and straightened, and Tabitha found herself looking at a man who seemed built from the same raw materials as the landscape itself. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were the color of good whiskey, amber brown with flecks of gold, and they assessed her with the same careful attention he'd been giving the horse. "Lucky Maria's a rough ride," he said. His voice was low and measured, each word considered before release. "Especially for someone in a traveling dress." "Then I'll change my dress," Tabitha said coolly. "Can you take me or not?" Question is whether I should." He moved to a workbench and began coiling a rope with practiced efficiency. "That claim's been abandoned for near 3 weeks. Snakes probably moved into the cabin, and the mine shaft's dangerous if you don't know what you're doing." "Are you always this encouraging, Mr. Holt?" Hayes Holt Nichols, but most folks just call me Holt." He hung the rope on a peg and finally gave her his full attention. "And I'm not here to encourage or discourage, miss. I'm here to tell you true. Silver Peak eats people who don't respect it. Pretty words in 3 languages won't change that." Tabitha felt something sharp flare in her chest. "How did you know? You switching to Spanish with Preston?" "Sound carries in a small town." He gestured toward the back of the stable. "There's a room where the last owner's daughter left some riding clothes. You can change there. We'll leave in an hour, give the worst heat time to pass. Cost you $2 for the trip out and back." She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need his conditions or his timeline, but the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her fed and safe through 4 years of navigating San Francisco society, knew he was right. Instead, she nodded once and went to find the riding clothes. The outfit was worn but clean. Split skirt, cotton blouse, and a leather vest that was a size too large. Tabitha braided her dark hair and pinned it up, studying herself in the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. She looked like someone playing dress-up, a Boston-educated girl pretending to be a frontier woman. But then again, wasn't that exactly what she was? Holt had 2 horses ready when she emerged, a sturdy bay for himself and a smaller chestnut mare for her. He helped her mount without comment, his hands professional and brief. They rode out of Silver Peak heading northeast, following a trail that was barely visible among the sagebrush and scattered rocks. The Nevada desert was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Mountains rose in the distance like broken teeth, their slopes painted in shades of rust and gold. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and the air smelled of dust and creosote. Tabitha had spent 4 years learning about art and literature and music, but no one had taught her about this kind of beauty, the kind that didn't care if you appreciated it or not. "Your father was a good man," Holt said after they'd been riding for 20 minutes. "Stubborn, but good. He talked about you sometimes." "Did he?" "It wasn't a question. Said you were the smartest person he'd ever met. Said you could read books in 3 languages and do mathematics that made his head spin." Holt's tone was conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. "Also said he'd made mistakes where you were concerned." Tabitha's hands tightened on the reins. "He told you all this?" "I delivered supplies to the Lucky Maria once a month. Man gets talkative when he's alone too much." Holt pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. "That's the marker. Claims just beyond." The Lucky Maria was more substantial than she'd expected. The cabin was small but well built, constructed of logs chinked with mud and a roof that appeared intact. There was a small corral and a shed, both empty now, and the mine entrance was carved into the hillside about 50 yards from the cabin, shored up with timber supports that looked relatively new. Holt dismounted and helped her down, then approached the cabin carefully. "Stay behind me. If there are rattlesnakes, I'd rather they meet me first." But the cabin was empty except for dust and memories. Her father's possessions were few: a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a table and 2 chairs, a stove, shelves with some tinned food and basic supplies. There was a trunk at the foot of the bed, and when Tabitha opened it, she found her father's clothes, some papers, and a leather journal. "I'll check the mine," Holt said from the doorway. "You take your time here." She sat on the bed, which creaked under her weight, and opened the journal. Her father's handwriting was spidery and irregular, entries dated and brief. Most were about the mine, about footage excavated and samples taken, but scattered throughout were other notes, personal ones. August 12, 1880 wrote to Tabitha again. No response. Can't blame her. December 3, 1880 found a promising vein today. If it pans out, maybe I can finally give her the life her mother wanted for her. May 22, 1881. Tabitha graduated today, according to Preston, who saw it in the San Francisco papers. My daughter, educated and refined. Maria would be so proud. I am proud, though I have no right to be. The entries blurred as Tabitha's eyes filled despite herself. She'd been so angry with him for so long, for dragging them from place to place, for her mother's early death from fever in a mining camp with no doctor, for his endless optimism in the face of repeated failures. She'd cultivated her anger like a garden, watering it with every slight and disappointment until it grew thick enough to hide behind. But here was evidence that he'd thought of her, that he'd cared, that he'd been trying in his own flawed way. She wiped her eyes impatiently and kept reading. July 15, 1882, the vein is real. A sayer in Virginia City confirmed it. High-grade ore, possibly one of the richest strikes in this part of Nevada. Have been working day and night to extract enough to prove the claim's value. Once I have sufficient evidence, I'll bring Tabitha home. She'll never have to worry about money again. She can use those languages of hers for something other than impressing people who don't matter. The date was just 3 weeks ago, shortly before he died. Tabitha's heart beat faster. If there really was silver here, if this claim was valuable, then everything changed. Holt's boots on the wooden steps interrupted her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, his expression serious. "You need to see the mine," he said. She followed him across the hard-packed dirt to the mine entrance. The opening was large enough to walk through upright, and Holt lit a lantern before leading her inside. The air was cooler here, smelling of earth and stone. They walked about 30 feet into the hillside, and then Holt raised the lantern. The rock face glittered even in the dim light, veins of silver ore running through the quartz like frozen lightning. It was beautiful and shocking, and Tabitha understood immediately why her father had worked himself to death. This wasn't a played-out claim. This was a fortune. "I'm no expert," Holt said quietly, "but I've seen enough mines to know this is special. Your father must have kept it quiet, worked alone so word wouldn't spread. In a town like Silver Peak, this kind of strike would bring every claim jumper and swindler within 100 miles. It's mine now," Tabitha said, and she heard the steel in her own voice. "Legally mine." "Yes, madam." "Question is what you plan to do with it." She turned to look at him in the lantern light. His face was all planes and shadows, strong and honest. "Why are you helping me? You could have told me the cabin was empty and the claim worthless." "You could have filed your own claim," said my father abandoned it. Holt met her eyes steadily. "Because your father trusted me, and because it wouldn't be right. I've done things I'm not proud of, Miss Ortega, but stealing from a dead man's daughter isn't going to be one of them." They stared at each other for a long moment, and something passed between them, some wordless understanding. Then Tabitha nodded and turned back to the silver veins. "I need to hire workers," she said, thinking aloud. "Men I can trust. I need to keep this quiet until I have enough ore extracted to prove the value. Then I can bring in larger operations, negotiate from a position of strength." "That's smart thinking," Holt said, "but there's a problem. The men in Silver Peak, they're not going to want to take orders from a woman, especially one they see as an outsider. And if you start hiring, people will ask questions. Then what do you suggest?" He was quiet for a moment, the lantern swaying slightly in his hand. "You hire me as foreman. I bring in men I trust, men who know how to keep their mouths shut. We work the claim quiet-like, haul the ore to Virginia City for processing under false names. Once you've got enough money secured, you can do whatever you want, sell the claim, keep working it, move back to San Francisco. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Standard foreman's wage plus 5% of the net profits." His voice was steady, businesslike. I'll draw up a contract if you want it in writing. Tabitha studied him, trying to read his intentions. In her experience, men always wanted something and they rarely stated it plainly. But Holt's amber eyes were calm and direct, and something in her gut said she could trust him. 10%, she said. If you're taking the risk of organizing this, you should be fairly compensated. But I want weekly reports and I want to approve any major decisions. That's more than fair. He extended his hand and after a moment she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but not crushing. We have an agreement, Miss Ortega. Call me Tabitha. If we're going to be partners in this enterprise, formality seems excessive. A smile ghosted across his face, there and gone like a cloud shadow. Tabitha, then, and I'm Holt. They rode back to Silver Peak as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tabitha's mind was racing with plans and contingencies, but beneath the practical thinking was something else, something she didn't have words for in any of her 3 languages. It was the feeling of possibility, of standing at the edge of something that could either destroy her or transform her completely. You'll need to stay in town, Holt said as they approached the outskirts. The boarding house is decent, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen. She's fair and doesn't gossip. Mrs. Chen, Tabitha repeated. Is she Chinese? Her late husband was. She's from Sacramento originally. Holt glanced at her. That going to be a problem for you? Of course not. I was simply curious. She paused. Thank you for taking me out there today, for being honest about what you found. Nothing to thank me for. I just did what was right. They stopped in front of a neat 2-story building with a painted sign reading Chen's Boarding House. Holt helped her dismount, and this time his hands lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Or maybe she imagined it. I'll come by tomorrow morning, he said. We can discuss the details, figure out a timeline. Tabitha nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The travel, the heat, the emotional weight of her father's journal, all of it crashed over her at once. Tomorrow, then. She watched him ride away toward the livery stable, his figure straight and easy in the saddle, before turning to enter the boarding house. Mrs. Chen was a small woman with gray-streaked black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She showed Tabitha to a clean room on the 2nd floor with a window overlooking the main street. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6, Mrs. Chen said. Extra charge for hot water for bathing. You need anything else, you let me know. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in an unfamiliar town, Tabitha stared at the ceiling and thought about her father, about silver veins in the darkness, about a cowboy with honest eyes. She'd come to Silver Peak expecting to settle an estate and leave. Instead, she'd found a fortune and a mystery, and possibly something else she wasn't ready to name. Sleep came eventually, and with it dreams of underground rivers running silver, of hands reaching out to steady her in the dark. Morning arrived hot and bright, as mornings in Nevada seemed to do. Tabitha dressed carefully in one of her simpler traveling dresses, dark blue with minimal ornamentation, and joined the other boarders for breakfast. There were 5 others at the table, 2 minors who barely looked at her, a school teacher named Miss Appleby who nodded politely, a traveling salesman who talked too much, and a young woman named Dolores who worked at the general store. You're the one who inherited old Ortega's claim, Dolores said, not unkindly. Must be strange, coming to a place you've never been for a father you hadn't seen in years. It is, Tabitha admitted, surprised by the girl's directness. But I'm making the best of it. That's all anyone can do out here. Dolores buttered a piece of toast. Silver Peak's not much, but it's honest. People mostly keep to themselves and help when help's needed. After breakfast, Tabitha waited on the boarding house porch, watching the town wake up. A wagon rolled past loaded with supplies. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm. Two children chased a dog down the street, their laughter bright in the morning air. Holt arrived precisely at 8, riding the same bay horse as yesterday. He dismounted and climbed the steps to join her, hat in hand. "Morning," he said. "Sleep well." "Well enough, you." "Same as always." He gestured toward the street. "We should walk while we talk, fewer ears." They strolled toward the edge of town, keeping their voices low. Holt outlined his plan. He'd recruit 3 men he'd worked with before, men who were skilled and discreet. They'd work the mine in shifts, extracting ore carefully to avoid cave-ins or accidents. Every 2 weeks, they'd haul a load to Virginia City under the guise of freight hauling, process it there, and bank the proceeds under a business name. "How long before we have enough to feel secure?" Tabitha asked. "Depends on the vein's depth and consistency. Could be 3 months, could be 6. But even a few weeks of extraction should give you enough capital to hire better help if you want it." They'd reached the desert's edge, where the buildings gave way to open land. The morning sun was already fierce, and Tabitha could feel sweat forming under her collar. "There's one more thing," Holt said, his tone shifting slightly. "People are going to talk about you and me, about a woman and a man working together without a chaperone. In a town this size, reputation matters." "I'm aware," Tabitha said coolly, "but I fail to see what we can do about it. I'm not going to marry someone just to satisfy small-town morality, and I assume you're not volunteering for the position." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "No, madam, just wanted you to know what you're facing. Some folks won't take kindly to it. Let them talk." "I've survived worse than gossip." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "I believe you have." The first week passed in a blur of activity. Holt brought his 3 men to meet her. Jack Winters, a grizzled miner in his 50s who'd worked claims from Montana to Arizona. Sam Boyd, younger and quieter with steady hands and a careful manner. And Tom Wright, broad-shouldered and cheerful, who seemed to find humor in everything. They all treated her with cautious politeness, clearly uncertain about taking direction from a woman but willing to follow Holt's lead. Tabitha rode out to the Lucky Maria every few days, always with Holt as escort. She watched the men work, learned the basics of hard rock mining, asked questions until she understood the process. At night, she studied her father's journal and the mineral rights documents, familiarizing herself with every detail of her inheritance. True to prediction, tongues began wagging. Tabitha heard the whispers when she walked through town, saw the sideways glances from the respectable ladies. But she'd learned in San Francisco how to hold her head high and ignore speculation, and she applied those lessons now. What surprised her was how much she enjoyed Holt's company. He wasn't educated in the traditional sense, no fancy schools or classical literature, but he was sharp and observant, with a dry wit that caught her off guard. He knew the desert like other men knew their own homes, could read weather in the clouds and water sources in the vegetation. He taught her things her expensive education had never covered: how to recognize different rock formations, how to tell a rattlesnake's warning from a bull snake's bluff, which plants were edible and which would kill you. "You're a good student," he said one afternoon as they rode back from the mine. "Most people don't actually listen. They just wait for their turn to talk." "In 3 languages, no less," Tabitha said, and was rewarded with one of his rare smiles. "Must be useful, speaking all those tongues." "You'd think so. But mostly it just means I can be misunderstood in 3 different ways." She surprised herself with the honesty. "Languages are just words, Holt. They don't teach you how to actually communicate with people." He was quiet for a moment, considering. Maybe communication isn't about the words. Maybe it's about the silence between them. It was such an unexpected observation, almost poetic, that Tabitha turned to stare at him. He met her gaze briefly, then looked away toward the mountains, and she realized with a start that Hayes Holt Nichols was deeper than she'd assumed, that there were layers to him she was only beginning to perceive. By the end of the second week, they'd extracted enough high-grade ore to fill 4 crates. Holt arranged for a freight wagon and made the trip to Virginia City himself, returning 3 days later with a bank draft that made Tabitha's breath catch. It was more money than she'd seen in her entire life, and this was just the beginning. The assayer in Virginia City was very interested in where this ore came from, Holt reported, handing her the paperwork. I told him it was from multiple small claims I was consolidating. He didn't quite believe me, but he processed it anyway. Will he cause problems? Not if we keep rotating through different assayers. Virginia City's big enough that we can spread the work around without drawing too much attention. Tabitha looked at the bank draft, feeling the weight of possibility and responsibility. With this money, she could return to San Francisco, set herself up in comfort, never worry about finances again. But something held her back, some thread connecting her to this harsh land and the people in it. We continue, she said, but I want to increase the work crew, speed up the extraction. The longer this takes, the greater the risk someone discovers what we have. Holt nodded. I know 2 more men who'd be good for this. Brothers, Mexican, experienced with hard rock mining. They're discreet. Hire them. The crew expanded, and the work accelerated. Tabitha moved between her boarding house room and the mine, between town life and the isolated claim. She was exhausted most of the time, her muscles aching from riding and her mind spinning with logistics and plans. But she was also more alive than she'd ever felt, more present in her own life than in all her years of education and refinement. It was during the 3rd week that things shifted between her and Holt. They were at the mine late, reviewing the day's work, when a support timber cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Holt moved without thinking, grabbing Tabitha and pulling her away from the mine entrance, just as a shower of rock and dirt cascaded down where she'd been standing. They ended up pressed against the side of the cabin, Holt's arms around her, his body shielding hers. For a moment, neither moved. Tabitha could feel his heart pounding against her back, could smell dust and sweat and leather. Then he released her carefully and stepped away. You all right? His voice was rough. Yes, thank you. Her own voice wasn't quite steady. That was close. Too close. We need to reinforce those timbers. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. I should have checked them this morning. You can't anticipate everything, Holt. When it comes to your safety, I damn well better try. The intensity in his voice surprised her, and when she looked at him, she saw something in his face that made her breath catch. It was there for just a moment before he turned away, but she'd seen it. Concern that went beyond professional, care that crossed into personal territory. Holt, she said softly, we should get back to town. It's getting late. He moved toward the horses, his movements stiff, controlled. They rode in silence as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold. Tabitha's mind was churning, processing what had just happened and what it might mean. She'd been courted before, by educated men with proper manners and appropriate prospects. But none of them had ever made her feel like this, like her chest was too small to contain her heartbeat, like the air had become something rare and precious. When they reached the boarding house, Holt dismounted and helped her down, his hands professional once more. But when her feet touched the ground, she didn't step back immediately. Instead, she looked up at him, studying his face in the fading light. Whatever you're thinking, she said quietly, you can say it. I won't break. His jaw tightened. "It's not my place to think anything, Tabitha. You're my employer, I work for you. Is that all this is? An employment arrangement, that's all it can be." But his eyes said something different, something that made her pulse race. "You're educated, refined. You speak 3 languages and come from good family. I'm a cowboy who spent his life drifting from job to job. When this mind plays out, you'll go back to your real life, and I'll move on to the next thing. That's how this works. And if I don't want it to work that way." He looked at her for a long moment, something like pain flickering across his face. "Then you're not thinking clearly. Good night, Tabitha." He mounted and rode away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the dusty street with her heart hammering and her mind full of words in 3 languages, none of which could capture what she was feeling. That night, she lay awake trying to make sense of her emotions. She'd built her life on logic and learning, on maintaining control and making rational decisions. But there was nothing rational about the way she felt when Holt looked at her, nothing logical about how much she'd come to depend on his presence. He was right that they came from different worlds, right that their partnership had a natural end point. But her heart didn't seem to care about any of that. The next morning, she woke to shouting in the street. Tabitha rushed to her window and saw a crowd gathering near the general store. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs, finding Mrs. Chen on the porch with several other residents. "What's happening?" Tabitha asked. "Claim jumpers," Mrs. Chen said grimly. "Someone tried to file paperwork on the Lucky Maria saying it was abandoned. Preston caught it before it went through, but there's going to be trouble." Tabitha's blood ran cold. "Where's Holt?" "Went to the county office first thing this morning to file a dispute." Mrs. Chen looked at her with knowing eyes. "You better get over there. This concerns you more than anyone." The county office was a small building next to the jail, and when Tabitha arrived, she found Holt confronting 2 men she didn't recognize. They were rough-looking types, the kind who'd probably jumped dozens of claims and thought they could intimidate their way to fortune. "The claim wasn't being worked," one of them was saying, a beefy man with a scar across his cheek. "That makes it abandoned under Nevada law." "The claim was being worked," Holt said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Has been for the past month. We've got receipts and records to prove it." "Records can be faked," the other man said, smaller but meaner looking. "Who's going to take the word of some drifter over? You'll take my word," Tabitha said, stepping into the office. Every head turned toward her. "I'm Tabitha Ortega, legal heir to the Lucky Maria claim. I've been working that claim continuously since I arrived in Silver Peak. My foreman and crew have been extracting ore and processing it in Virginia City. We have bank drafts, assayer reports, and witness testimony. Now, who exactly are you, and what gives you the right to try stealing my property?" The 2 men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting to face an educated woman who knew her legal rights. The bigger one rallied first. "We filed in good faith, miss. If the claim's legitimately yours, well, that's just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that would have cost me everything if Mr. Preston hadn't been diligent." Tabitha moved to stand beside Holt, presenting a united front. "I don't believe in coincidences, gentlemen. Someone told you about the Lucky Maria, about its value. Who was it?" "Now, that's not, who was it?" Her voice cracked like a whip, and she saw both men flinch. Behind them, the county clerk, a nervous man named Whitmore, shuffled papers frantically. "There's been interest," the smaller man finally admitted. "Words going around about a strike near Silver Peak. We heard the claim was sitting empty, so we figured, you figured you'd steal it." Holt's hand rested on his gun belt, not threateningly but noticeably. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your filing. You're going to leave Silver Peak, and you're going to tell whoever sent you that the Lucky Maria is spoken for. If you don't, if I see you anywhere near that claim or Miss Ortega, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Understand?" The two men looked at each other, then at Tabitha's set face and Holt's steady gaze, and made their decision. They nodded once and left quickly, almost tripping over each other in their haste. When they were gone, Tabitha let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "How did they find out?" "Could be anyone," Holt said. "The Virginia City assayers, the men working the claim, someone in town who noticed the increased activity. Secret this big was always going to come out eventually. Then we need to move faster. Extract as much as we can and secure it legally before the real trouble starts." She turned to Whitmore, who was trying to look invisible behind his desk. "Mr. Whitmore, I want every piece of paperwork related to the Lucky Maria claim certified and copied. Multiple sets stored in different locations. Can you do that?" "Why, yes, Miss Ortega. I can have it ready by tomorrow." "Good. Bill me for the extra work." She nodded to Holt. "We need to talk outside." They walked to the edge of town again, a habit now. Tabitha's mind was racing through scenarios and possibilities, but underneath the practical thinking was fear, real and sharp. "They'll be back," she said. "Or others like them. We're targets now." "Yes." Holt's face was grim. "But we expected this. We just need to stay smart and stay ahead of them. And if they don't use legal means next time, if they decide to simply take what they want, then they'll have to go through me first." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "That's what worries me, Holt. I don't want you getting hurt over silver. It's not worth it." "You are, though." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Holt looked like he wanted to take them back, but he didn't. Instead, he held her gaze, letting her see the truth in his eyes. "Holt, I don't." He shook his head. "Don't say anything you can't mean long term. I'm not a man who does things halfway, Tabitha. If you feel something for me, if this is more than just proximity and circumstance, then you need to be sure. Because once I let myself hope, once I let myself feel what I've been fighting since the day I met you, there's no going back for me." Tabitha's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. All her languages, all her education, and she couldn't find the right words. So instead, she did something she'd never done before. She acted without thinking, without planning. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. For a moment, Holt froze, clearly shocked. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her back with a hunger that made her knees weak. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she'd experienced from proper suitors. This was heat and need, and something raw that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "That was answer enough," he said, his voice rough. "But Tabitha, you need to understand what you're choosing. I'm not rich, I'm not refined, and I can't give you the life you're used to." "I don't want the life I'm used to," she said fiercely. "I want this, I want you. I want to build something real, something that matters. Everything else is just words, Holt. Beautiful, empty words." He pulled back to look at her, his amber eyes searching her face. "You speak 3 languages, but not love, is that it?" "I'm learning," she whispered. "Teach me." He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. When they finally separated, he kept her hand in his, threading their fingers together. "The only word that matters is yes," he said. "Yes to this, to us, to whatever comes next. But you have to be sure, Tabitha. Once we do this, once people know we're together, there's no going back to being just employer and foreman." "I don't want to go back, I want to go forward." She squeezed his hand. "With you." They walked back to town holding hands, and if anyone saw them and whispered, Tabitha didn't care. Something had shifted inside her, some lock had opened, and she felt more herself than she ever had in Boston or San Francisco or any of the proper places she'd lived. That evening, Mrs. Chen cornered her in the boarding house parlor. The older woman studied her with sharp eyes, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. "Hayes Nichols is a good man," she said without preamble. "Honest, hardworking, doesn't drink or gamble, but he's had a hard life, lost people. He doesn't let himself care easy, but when he does, it's complete. You hurt him, you'll answer to me." "I won't hurt him," Tabitha said. "At least, not on purpose." "Nobody hurts people on purpose, child. That's why you have to be careful." Mrs. Chen softened slightly. "But I think you're good for each other. You both need someone who sees past the surface to what's underneath." The next few weeks were both wonderful and terrifying. Wonderful because Tabitha had never felt this way before, like she was finally awake after years of sleepwalking through life. Every moment with Holt felt significant, whether they were discussing mine operations or simply riding together in comfortable silence. He taught her to read the desert's subtle signs, and she taught him bits of Spanish and French, laughing when he mangled the pronunciations. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing histories and dreams, terrifying because the threats kept coming. 3 more times, men tried to file claims or stake boundaries that encroached on the Lucky Maria. Each time, Holt and Tabitha fought them off with paperwork and presents, but the pressure was building. Word had definitely spread about the strike, and Silver Peak was filling up with opportunists and troublemakers. "We need to make a decision," Holt said one night as they sat on the boarding house porch. It was late September, and the desert nights were finally cooling. "Either we sell the claim to one of the big mining companies and take the profit, or we dig in and fight to keep it. But we can't keep doing this halfway." Tabitha had been thinking about the same thing. "If we sell, how much do you think we could get? With the ore samples we have. Easily $50,000, maybe more. Enough for you to live comfortably for the rest of your life." "Enough for both of us to live comfortably if," he stopped, looking uncertain. "If we're together," she finished. "Is that what you want, Holt, to sell and move on?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark street. "What I want is to give you choices. You're smart enough and educated enough to do anything, be anything. You could go back east, open a school, teach languages. You could travel to Europe, see all those places you've read about. You shouldn't be stuck in Silver Peak because of a mine. And what about you? What do you want for yourself?" He looked at her, and in the lamplight from the window his eyes were soft. "I want to build something that lasts. I've been drifting for 10 years, taking jobs and moving on. I'm tired of it, Tabitha. I want a home, a place to put down roots. I want a future that's more than just the next paycheck. With me." Her heart was pounding. "If you'll have me. I know I'm not what you probably imagined for yourself," but she kissed him to stop the self-deprecation, and he responded immediately, pulling her close. When they separated, she kept her hands on his face, making him look at her. "You are exactly what I need," she said firmly. "Not what I imagined, no, something better, something real. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to work this claim for another month, extract as much high-grade ore as possible. Then we're going to sell the Lucky Maria to the highest bidder and use that money to build something permanent. A ranch, maybe, or a business. Something that's ours together. A partnership," he said, and she could hear the hope in his voice. "More than that. A life." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Tabitha felt something settle in her chest, some restless thing finally finding its place. They sat together on the porch until late, making plans and dreaming out loud, and for the first time in her life, the future felt like a promise instead of a threat. The next month was intense. They pushed the crew hard, extracting ore as fast as safely possible. Holt made 3 more trips to Virginia City, rotating through different assayers and banking locations to avoid drawing too much attention. The money accumulated faster than Tabitha had dared hope, and she opened accounts in both their names, making their partnership official. But the success brought increased danger. In mid-October, someone took a shot at Holt as he rode back from the mine. The bullet missed, but the message was clear. People were watching, and some were willing to escalate beyond legal maneuvering. Holt hired guards for the mine and insisted on escorting Tabitha everywhere she went. She chafed at the restriction but understood the necessity. "This can't continue," she said after the shooting. They were in the lawyer's office, and Preston was drawing up sale contracts. "We need to sell now before someone gets killed." "I agree," Holt said. "Preston, how fast can you arrange a sale?" The lawyer adjusted his spectacles. "There are 3 companies that have expressed interest: Pacific Mining, Carson Consolidated, and Desert Silver Corporation. I can have representatives from all 3 here within a week if you're willing to entertain bids." "Do it," Tabitha said, "but quietly. I don't want every criminal in Nevada knowing we're about to come into serious money." The bidding happened in Preston's office with guards posted outside. The 3 company representatives were experienced men who knew exactly what they were looking at when Preston showed them the ore samples and assayer reports. The bidding was fierce, and when it finally ended, Desert Silver Corporation had won with an offer of $78,000 to be paid in certified bank drafts upon transfer of the claim. $78,000. Tabitha could barely comprehend the number. It was more money than her father had made in his entire life, more than she'd ever dreamed of possessing. And half of it was Holt's, their partnership contract ensuring fair distribution. The sale closed 3 days later in the county office, with Whitmore officiating and witnesses present. When Tabitha signed the final papers, she felt both relief and sadness. The Lucky Maria had been her connection to her father, proof that his dreams hadn't been completely foolish. But it had also nearly gotten them killed, and she was ready to move on. That night, she and Holt celebrated quietly in the boarding house parlor. Mrs. Chen had made a special dinner, and several of the other residents joined them, toasting their success with glasses of wine. It felt like a community, like belonging, and Tabitha realized how much she'd come to care for this rough little town and its people. "What now?" Dolores asked. The young woman had become something like a friend over the past months. "Are you going back to San Francisco?" Tabitha looked at Holt, who looked back at her with a question in his eyes. She took his hand, feeling the calluses she'd come to love, and smiled. "We're staying," she said. "We're going to buy land and build a ranch, raise horses, maybe some cattle, make a life here." "Together," Holt added, and the way he said it made her heart skip. "If she'll have me permanent like, Tabitha Ortega, will you marry me?" The room went silent. Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes, but she was smiling as she said, "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." The parlor erupted in cheers and congratulations. Mrs. Chen was crying openly, and even the gruff old miners looked pleased. Holt pulled Tabitha into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring who saw, and she kissed him back with all the love she'd been hoarding in her careful heart. They married 2 weeks later in Silver Peak's small church, with half the town in attendance. Tabitha wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Chen helped her make, and Holt wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. There was no orchestra or fancy reception like there would have been in San Francisco. Just a community gathering with food and music and genuine joy. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, when Holt kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak, Tabitha felt something click into place. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it, Not refinement or education or linguistic skill, but connection. Love. Home. They spent their wedding night in the cabin at the Lucky Maria, which was officially theirs until the mine company took possession in January. It was fitting, somehow, to start their married life in the place where everything had begun. Holt carried her over the threshold, and she laughed at the traditional gesture from this non-traditional man. "I love you," she whispered as they stood together in the lamplight. "I don't think I knew what that meant until I met you. All my words, all my languages, and I'd never learned the only one that mattered." "And what's that?" he asked, holding her close. "Love. You taught me how to speak it, Holt. Not with words, but with actions, with patience, with seeing me for who I actually am instead of who I'm supposed to be." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You taught me the same thing. How to believe in something beyond the next job, the next town. How to hope." They made love slowly, learning each other in the darkness, and it was nothing like Tabitha's carefully cultivated expectations. It was better, messier, realer, full of laughter and tenderness and the occasional awkward moment that they navigated together. Afterward, lying in Holt's arms with the desert wind whistling softly outside, she felt complete in a way she never had before. "Tell me something in French," Holt murmured, half asleep. "Je t'aime," she said. "It means I love you." And in Spanish, "Te amo." And in English, she smiled against his chest. "I love you, Hayes Holt Nichols, in every language, in every way possible." "That's the only translation I need," he said, and she felt him smile too. They spent November searching for property and found a beautiful piece of land about 5 miles south of Silver Peak, near a creek that ran year-round. There were 300 acres of desert grassland, good for grazing, with enough water for horses and a small garden. They bought it with a portion of their mining profits and spent December building. Holt was a skilled carpenter, it turned out, and with help from the men who'd worked the mine, they constructed a solid house. 4 rooms with a real wood floor and glass windows. It wasn't fancy by San Francisco standards, but to Tabitha, it was perfect. They built a barn and corral, a smokehouse and root cellar. They planted fruit trees that wouldn't bear for years but represented faith in the future. On Christmas Day, they moved into their new home. It snowed that night, rare for Silver Peak, and they sat by the fireplace watching the flames dance while fat snowflakes fell outside the window. "I've been thinking," Tabitha said, "about the money we have left. We could invest it, use it to grow the ranch. But I'd like to use some of it differently." "How so?" "A school. Silver Peak doesn't have a proper one, just Miss Appleby trying to teach in the church basement. What if we built a real school, hired good teachers? I could teach languages, literature. Give children the kind of education I had, but without all the pretension." Holt looked at her with such pride that she felt her chest tighten. "That's a fine idea. Your father would have loved knowing his mine funded something like that." "Our mine," she corrected. "Our money, our future. Everything we do from now on, we do together." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Partners in everything." "In everything," she agreed. The school became a reality over the next 6 months. They built a 1-room schoolhouse near the center of town, with real desks and a slate board and shelves for books. Tabitha ordered primers and readers from San Francisco, atlases and mathematics texts. She found a young woman named Sarah Brennan, who taught in Sacramento and was willing to relocate for a fair wage. The school opened in September of 1883, and 15 children attended that first day. Tabitha taught languages and literature twice a week, and she discovered a joy in it she'd never expected. These weren't wealthy merchants' children learning French to seem cultured. These were miners' and farmers' children learning because they were hungry for knowledge, for a window beyond Silver Peak's boundaries. The ranch prospered too. Holt had an eye for horses, and the breeding stock they purchased produced strong, smart animals that sold well throughout Nevada. They hired 2 hands to help with the work, and slowly, steadily, they built something substantial. In November of 1883, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant. She told Holt on a cold evening as they sat by the fire, and he reacted with such pure joy that she started crying. He knelt beside her chair, his hands on her belly, his face full of wonder. "A baby," he kept saying. "Our baby." "Are you ready for this?" she asked, half laughing, half serious. "For dirty diapers and sleepless nights and complete chaos. With you, I'm ready for anything." Their son was born in June of 1884, delivered by Mrs. Chen, with Holt pacing outside until the older woman finally told him to come in and meet his child. He was a healthy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's amber eyes, and they named him James Owen Nichols, after both their fathers. Holding her son for the first time, watching Holt's face as he carefully cradled the tiny body, Tabitha felt overwhelmed by love. This was what mattered, not languages or education or refinement, but this: family, connection, the building of something that would outlast them both. "He's perfect," Holt whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He is," Tabitha agreed, "just like his father." Life settled into a rhythm over the next years. The ranch grew, the school flourished, and their family expanded. A daughter named Rose arrived in 1886, and another son, David, in 1888. Silver Peak grew too, becoming less of a rough mining town and more of an established community. They built a proper church, a larger general store, even a small hotel for travelers. Tabitha continued teaching, though she reduced her hours as the children grew. She loved watching her students' progress, loved seeing their faces light up when they mastered something new. Several of her former students went on to universities back east, and they wrote to her with gratitude and updates on their lives. But the greatest joy was her marriage. She and Holt grew closer with each passing year, learning each other's rhythms and moods, building a partnership that went bone deep. They still rode out to the desert together when they could, just the two of them, and sat watching the sunsets paint the mountains in impossible colors. "Do you ever regret it?" Holt asked one evening. They were on a ridge overlooking their land, their children playing in the creek below under the supervision of one of the ranch hands. Giving up San Francisco, the society life, all those opportunities. Tabitha thought about it seriously, wanting to give him an honest answer. "Sometimes I wonder what that life would have been like," she admitted. "Who I would have become if I'd stayed. But regret? Never. This is where I belong, Holt. With you, with our children, with this community. I'm more myself here than I ever was in all those cultured drawing rooms." "You never talk about your languages anymore," he observed. "About French or Spanish." "I use Spanish with the Martinez family when they come to buy horses, and I teach French at the school still." She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and warm. "But you were right, all those years ago. Those languages don't matter the way I thought they did. What matters is speaking the language of the heart. That's what you taught me." He kissed her temple. "You taught yourself that, Tabitha. I just gave you the space to figure it out." In 1890, they celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary by taking all 3 children on a trip to Virginia City. It was an adventure, 6 days of travel, staying in hotels, showing the children where their parents had sold ore from the Lucky Maria. James was 6 now, Rose 4, and David 2, and they were endlessly curious about everything. Standing in the assayer's office where she and Holt had first converted ore to cash, Tabitha felt a wave of nostalgia. So much had changed since those desperate, exciting days. They weren't young anymore. She was 31 now, Holt 34, and they carried the comfortable weight of established life. But the connection between them, that spark that had ignited in the Nevada desert 8 years ago, burned just as bright. "What are you thinking?" Holt asked, holding David while James and Rose pressed their faces against the window. "That I love you," she said simply. "That I'm grateful for every choice that led me to that train platform in Silver Peak. Even the ones that hurt, especially those. The pain made the joy sharper, made me appreciate what we have." He shifted David to one hip and took her hand with his free one. "Here's to another 8 years, and another 8 after that, and however many more we get." "Forever," Tabitha said. "Here's to forever." They returned to Silver Peak, refreshed and ready to jump back into their routines. The ranch continued to prosper, and in 1892 they expanded significantly, buying the adjacent property and increasing their acreage to 700. They built a larger barn and hired 2 more hands, making it a real operation. Holt had become known throughout Nevada as a fair dealer and a skilled horseman, and buyers came from as far as California to purchase their stock. The school expanded too. By 1893, they had to add a second room and hire another teacher to accommodate all the students. Tabitha served on the school board and helped establish a small lending library, ordering books from back east and encouraging literacy throughout the community. She still taught her language classes, and now Rose was old enough to attend, sitting in the front row with a serious expression that reminded Tabitha of herself at that age. "She's going to be smarter than both of us," Holt said one evening, watching Rose practice her letters at the kitchen table while James did mathematics problems and David built block towers nearby. "Probably," Tabitha agreed, "but hopefully she'll be wiser too. She won't have to learn the hard way that love matters more than accomplishments." "You don't think accomplishments matter?" "I think they matter, but not as much as connection. Not as much as building something real with people you care about." She moved behind his chair and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "Everything I've accomplished that matters, I've done with you." He tilted his head back to look at her, and even after 9 years of marriage, the love in his eyes still made her breath catch. "The feeling's mutual, Mrs. Nichols." In 1895, when Tabitha was 36 and Holt 39, they received an unexpected letter from a university in San Francisco. Someone had read about her language school in Silver Peak. Apparently, one of her former students had written an article for an educational journal, and they wanted to offer her a position teaching linguistics. The salary was substantial, the prestige considerable. It was everything she might have wanted 15 years ago. She showed the letter to Holt that evening after the children were in bed. He read it carefully, his expression neutral. "This is a big opportunity," he said finally. "Teaching at a university level, shaping young minds. You'd be good at it. I am good at it. Here in Silver Peak with children who actually need me." She took the letter and held it over the fireplace. "May I? It's your letter, your choice." She dropped it into the flames and watched it curl and blacken. "My choice is you, Holt. It's always been you, and our children and this place and the life we've built. I don't need a university position to validate me. I have everything that matters right here." He pulled her into his lap and she went willingly, nestling against his chest. "I love you," he said. "Have I told you that today?" "Only 3 times. You're slipping." He laughed and kissed her, and they sat together watching the fire until long after the letter had turned to ash. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and harvests, by children growing and the ranch expanding. James became a skilled rider, helping with the horse training by the time he was 12. Rose showed her mother's aptitude for languages, and her father's love of the outdoors, equally comfortable with conjugating French verbs or breaking a young colt. David was the dreamer, always drawing pictures or making up stories, and they encouraged his creativity even though ranch life didn't offer many outlets for it. In 1899, as the century turned, Silver Peak held a celebration. The town had grown to nearly 500 people, with proper streets and gas lighting, and even talk of bringing in a railroad spur. Tabitha and Holt attended the festivities with their children, now 15, 13, and 11, and they marveled at how much had changed since that hot August day in 1882, when Tabitha had stepped off the train carrying a telegram about her dead father. 17 years, Tabitha said, standing with Holt at the edge of the celebration, watching their children dance with other young people. Can you believe it's been 17 years since we met? Best 17 years of my life, Holt said. His hair was graying at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to Tabitha, he was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen. Here's to 17 more. And 17 after that, she added, echoing their old promise. In 1902, James left for college in Sacramento, the first member of either of their families to pursue higher education. It was bittersweet watching him go, but they were proud of his ambition and his dedication. He wanted to study veterinary medicine, to come back and improve ranch practices throughout Nevada. Rose talked about following him in a few years, maybe studying languages formally like her mother had. They're growing up, Tabitha said the night after they'd sent James off on the train. She and Holt sat on the porch of their house, larger now, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. Soon they'll all be gone, starting their own lives. That's what we raised them for, Holt said, to be strong enough to leave, confident enough to build their own dreams. I know, it's just strange to think about. For 20 years our lives have revolved around them. What will we do with ourselves? He took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her palm. The same thing we did before, build something together. Maybe travel some, see those places you used to read about. Maybe just sit on this porch and watch the sunsets. As long as we're together, I don't much care what we do. She leaned against him, comfortable in the silence. They'd learned, over 20 years of marriage, that the best communication often happened without words. A touch, a glance, the simple presence of another person who knew you completely, that was the language that mattered most. David left for art school in San Francisco in 1904, and Rose followed James to Sacramento in 1905 to study languages and literature. Suddenly, after 23 years of active parenting, Tabitha and Holt found themselves alone again in the house they'd built together. It was quiet without the constant noise of children, strange to cook for just 2 people, odd to not have anyone to tuck in at night. But it was also, in its way, a second beginning. They had time for each other again, long conversations that stretched into the night, spontaneous rides into the desert like they used to take. They made love with the freedom of knowing no one would interrupt, rediscovering each other's bodies and hearts. I feel like we're courting again, Tabitha said one morning as they lay in bed watching the sunrise through their window, learning each other all over again. We're just getting to the good part, Holt said, the part where we get to be selfish, focus on us instead of everyone else. They traveled some, taking the train to San Francisco to visit David and see his artwork displayed in a small gallery. They went to Sacramento to watch Rose present a paper on comparative linguistics at a university symposium. They attended James's graduation from veterinary school and cried with pride when he opened his own practice in Reno. But they always came back to Silver Peak, to the ranch and the desert and the community they'd helped build. Tabitha continued teaching at the school until 1908, when she finally retired at age 49. The town honored her with a ceremony, and former students came from across Nevada to pay tribute. She was embarrassed by the attention but secretly thrilled, knowing she'd made a real difference in people's lives. The ranch continued to prosper under Holt's management, though he did less of the physical work now, hiring younger men to handle the day-to-day operations. He was 51, still strong but acknowledging the toll years of hard work had taken on his body. They talked sometimes about selling, moving to a smaller property, but neither could quite imagine leaving the place they'd built together. In 1910, James married a teacher from Reno named Elizabeth. The wedding was at the ranch, and seeing their oldest son standing under an arch of flowers with his new bride, Tabitha felt time fold in on itself. It seemed like just yesterday he'd been a baby in her arms, and now he was starting his own family. "We're going to be grandparents," she whispered to Holt during the reception. Terrifying thought, isn't it? But he was grinning, clearly pleased by the idea. Their first grandchild, a boy named Samuel, arrived in 1911. Holding him for the first time, Tabitha felt the weight of generations, the continuation of everything she and Holt had built. This child would carry their stories forward, would inherit not just property or money but values and love. Rose married in 1912, a professor of Romance languages she'd met at university. David remained single but successful, his artwork gaining recognition throughout California. The ranch house filled with grandchildren over the next years, as James and Elizabeth had 3 more children, and Rose had 2 of her own. Through it all, through the noise and chaos of family gatherings and the quiet stretches when it was just the 2 of them, Tabitha and Holt remained the center of each other's worlds. They'd grown together like 2 trees planted side by side, their roots intertwined so thoroughly that separating them was impossible. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, their children organized a party at the ranch. The entire town seemed to show up, testament to how much respect and affection people felt for the couple who'd done so much for Silver Peak. There were speeches and toasts, and when it was Holt's turn to speak, he stood with Tabitha beside him and cleared his throat. 30 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, a woman stepped off a train in Silver Peak speaking 3 languages but not knowing the only word that mattered. I was just a cowboy trying to make an honest living, and she was educated and refined and completely out of my league. But somehow we found each other. She taught me about hope and dreaming, and I taught her that love isn't something you say, it's something you do, every single day in 1,000 small ways. He turned to look at Tabitha, and she saw tears in his eyes. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Tabitha Nichols. These 30 years have been the greatest adventure of my life, and if I had it to do over, I wouldn't change a single moment. I love you in every language, in every way possible. I love you." She was crying now too, not caring who saw. "I love you too," she said. "You taught me what love really means, Holt. Not words in books or romantic poetry, but partnership and patience and showing up every day no matter what. You taught me the only word that matters, and I've been speaking it for 30 years. They kissed while the crowd cheered, and Tabitha felt the same spark she'd felt that first time in the Nevada desert, the same electricity that had never faded. This was love, not the romance of novels or the passion of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. It was the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through joy and hardship and everything in between. The years continued as they always did. Holt's hair went completely gray, and Tabitha's followed suit. They moved a little slower, Tired a little easier, but the fundamental connection between them remained strong. They sold the ranch in 1920 to one of their longtime hands, keeping just the house and 5 acres for themselves. It was time to let the younger generation take over, to step back and enjoy what they'd built. They spent their days tending a garden, reading on the porch, receiving visits from children and grandchildren who filled the house with noise and life. David finally married in 1922, bringing his artist wife to meet the family. James's veterinary practice thrived, and he took on a partner to help with the workload. Rose became the head of the language department at her university, and her research was published in journals across the country. "We did good," Holt said one evening. They were 74 and 71 now, watching yet another sunset paint the Nevada sky in impossible colors. "Our kids turned out good, made good lives for themselves." "We did very good," Tabitha agreed, "but the best thing we did was this us." Everything else flowed from here. He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued his fingers. "No regrets, not a single one. Only that we didn't meet sooner, that we didn't get more time. We got 39 years, Holt. That's more than most people get." "That's a lifetime of love." "It's not enough," he said softly. "I could have 100 years with you and it wouldn't be enough." She leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet. "Then we'll make the most of whatever time we have left. We'll love each other fiercely until the very end, and even beyond that." "Even beyond that," he echoed. They sat together as the sun sank below the mountains, as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, the desert breathed and settled into evening, the same desert that had witnessed their first meeting, their first kiss, their first everything. It had been harsh and unforgiving back then, and it was harsh and unforgiving still. But it was also beautiful in its way, and it was home. In 1925, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary with just family children, grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren from James's oldest daughter. The house was full of love and laughter, of multiple generations telling stories and making memories. Tabitha watched it all from her chair on the porch, Holt beside her as always, and felt such overwhelming gratitude that she could barely breathe. This was what mattered. Not the languages she'd learned or the education she'd received, not the silver mine or the money they'd made. The love she and Holt had built together, the family that had grown from that love, the community they'd helped nurture. This was the only word that mattered, spoken not with sounds but with lives lived fully and honestly and generously. "Thank you," she whispered to Holt as the party continued around them. "For what? For teaching me how to love, for being patient while I figured it out, for 32 years of showing me every single day what it means to be truly seen and cherished." He squeezed her hand. "You taught me the same things, Tabitha. We taught each other. That's what partnership means." As the evening deepened and the party moved inside, they remained on the porch, 2 people who had become one through decades of shared life. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying scents of sage and creosote, carrying memories of a hot August day in 1882 when everything changed. "I love you," Tabitha said in English. "Je t'aime," Holt replied, his pronunciation terrible but his meaning clear. "Ti amo," they said together, and then they laughed, the sound young despite their age, and kissed as the stars wheeled overhead, and the desert kept its eternal watch. Hayes Holt Nichols died peacefully in his sleep in January of 1926, at the age of 79. Tabitha was beside him when it happened, holding his hand as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. She didn't cry at first, too shocked by the absence of the presence that had defined her life for 43 years. But later, After the children had been called and the arrangements made, she sat on their porch and let the tears come. She lived another 4 years, surrounded by family but feeling perpetually half-present. Part of her had died with Holt, and the remaining part was just going through the motions, waiting. She continued to teach occasional classes at the school, spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, tried to find purpose in each day. But everything felt muted, like someone had turned down the color and volume on life itself. On a warm evening in June of 1930, Tabitha sat on the porch of the house she and Holt had built together 47 years earlier. She was 71, and her body was tired, ready for rest. Around her, the desert was alive with evening sounds. The call of a mourning dove, the rustle of wind through sage, the distant yip of a coyote. It was the same desert that had witnessed her transformation from a bitter, carefully controlled young woman into someone who understood what mattered. "I'm coming, Holt," she whispered to the wind. "I'll be there soon." She closed her eyes, and in her mind she saw him as he'd been that first day, tall and strong and honest, looking at her with those amber eyes that had seen straight through her defenses. She saw their wedding day, the births of their children, 1,000 ordinary moments that had added up to an extraordinary life. She heard his voice teaching her the only word that mattered, felt his hand in hers steady and sure. When James found her the next morning, she was still in her chair, peaceful and smiling, finally reunited with her cowboy who'd taught her how to love. They buried her beside Holt in the Silver Peak Cemetery, under a headstone that read, Tabitha Ortega Nichols, 1859–1930. She spoke 3 languages but learned that love was the only word that mattered. The ranch house still stands, though it's owned by different people now. The school Tabitha helped build was replaced by a larger facility in the 1950s, but her name is still honored on a plaque in the entrance. Silver Peak itself has gone through cycles of boom and decline, but it endures, as places shaped by strong people tend to do. And sometimes, on warm evenings when the desert wind blows just right, people say you can feel something in the air, the echo of a great love story, of 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something lasting. It's just a legend, of course, the kind of story small towns tell to remember their history. But legends often contain truth, and the truth is this. In 1882, a woman arrived in Silver Peak, Nevada, speaking English, Spanish, and French but not understanding the most important language of all. A cowboy with honest eyes and a patient heart taught her that love isn't something you say, it's something you do, every day, in 1,000 small ways. Together, they built a life that mattered, raised children who thrived, and created a legacy of love that outlasted them both. That's the only word that matters. That's the only story worth telling. And in the end, it's the only language anyone really needs to know.